In this video, we'll discuss the concepts of the cascading effect and order of specificity in CSS. Now, I've made some changes to the index.html page and style CSS from our prior video. The index.html page still includes the external styles.css file, which we can see here. Actually, let me split this screen, close the Explorer so we can see a little more of the code, while seeing the effects of the changes we make applied on the web page. So again, we're including the external styles.css file, like we did in the last video, which applies a style with a color of blue and text aligned center to the h1 element on the page. The HTML file clearly only includes a header and an h1 element this time, but that's enough HTML for us to discuss these topics. Now, to discuss the cascading effect, we need to add a little more CSS to our page. So we know we're including a style CSS file, and that's in the head. Also in the head, after the link to the external file, let's add some internal CSS using a style block. And in this CSS, I'll target the H1 selector and set its color to red. Now, if I save this code and look over in the browser, we see that the font color of the H1 element has changed to red. Well, what's going on here? We said that the preferred way to implement CSS in a web page is to use an external style sheet, which we did, and we've included it here. And prior to adding the style block, we did see that the text for the H1 was blue. But now we've added another style, which comes after the external style sheet, and we see that the color is red. The H1 element is still centered on the page, but the color has changed. And that's the cascading effect. So when the page loads, it goes out and it finds style CSS. It brings the styles down and it says, hey, I need to find the H1 element and set its color to blue and align its text center on the page. It does that, and then it moves down in the head. It happens to see a style block. So it starts processing the CSS in the style block, and it says, hey, I have a style that I need to apply to the H1 element, so let me go find it. And now change its color to red. It doesn't change the text align center, it just cascades the common style, or the style that we're overwriting, from the prior style, which in this case came from the external style sheet. Now, in a prior video where we were discussing implementing CSS using the internal style and we added the style block to the head, I mentioned that you can also add style blocks inside of the body. Now, I wouldn't say it's best practice. If you're going to use internal styles, the best place to put them is in the head, although we really would like to use external style sheets. I'm going to add an internal style in the body to show you some more of that cascading effect. And in this case, I'm going to change the color of the H1's text to green, and I'm going to change the text align property to be right aligned on the page. And if I save this and we look over in the browser, we'll see that in fact the color has changed to green and the text was right aligned on the page. So we're cascading from the external style sheet of blue to the internal style sheet of red to the next internal style sheet of green. And then in this file internal style, we've changed the text align to right, which is cascaded from the text align to center, which was in the external style sheet. So this is the cascading effect in CSS, cascading style sheets. For the last topic in this video, I'd like to look at the order of specificity for CSS. In this example, we'll see that I've included styles in the head just for ease of looking at this code. So I have three styles. The first one targets the HTML paragraphs using the HTML-P element selector, and it says set the color of the text in the paragraph to red. The second one is a class selector, which says find all HTML elements on the page that have a class of para and set their color to green. And the third one targets the single HTML element on the page with an ID of standout, changing its color to green. Now in this section element on the page, I have 3 paragraphs. Right now, obviously, none of them have classes or ID attributes. So if we look at the rendering in the browser, we'll see that the text for all 3 paragraphs is red, because that is the only style which is applied at this time. If I were to add class attributes of para to the second and third paragraphs and save the page, in the browser, we see that the color blue is now applied to those 2 paragraphs. Even though the HTML selector for the paragraph tag applies the color red, a class is a more specific target or more specific selector when targeting the HTML elements. So sure, the color red is applied to all of the HTML paragraphs on the page, but then there's a more specific style which can be applied using the class attribute. So the color of the second paragraphs is overridden because the class attribute is more specific, which is why we see blue on those 2 paragraphs. Finally, if I go to the third paragraph and I add the ID attribute with a value of standout and save the page, and we look in the browser, we see that the third paragraph now has a color of green. That's because the ID selector is more specific than the class selector. Remember, when we use a CSS selector which targets an HTML element tag, that style gets applied to every instance of that element in the code. The class attribute is applied to all the HTML elements in the code which have that class attribute and value assigned to them. And then the ID attribute's value has to be unique to point to a specific HTML element on the page, and that is as specific as you could get in order of specificity in CSS. In the next video in our series, we'll look at the CSS box model.